This is part 2 on the case of Karen Louise Ellis. So at the police station, Karen admitted to being with Ben and also acknowledged that this was wrong. So at first it seemed like she did have some type of remorse, but then she went on to say, quote, "Well, if I were to divorce my husband tomorrow and Ben would have turned 18, I would imagine that we would continue to see each other." Which honestly confused a lot of people. You know, they were like, okay, do you actually feel like what you did was wrong, or do you not feel like what you did was wrong and you're just basically waiting for Ben to turn 18? After her arrest, she did have to resign from her teaching position, and when her husband Stephen heard what she had done, he just could not believe that his wife had abused a 15-year-old boy. So he packed up everything from the house, moved out, and said that he needed a break from the marriage. Fast forward to the trial, Karen pled guilty to the essay of a boy under 16 years old, and this could carry a maximum sentence of at least 15 years. During the trial, she was asked, "Why did you do this? Like, why did you cross this line?" And she basically said that she was very neglected by her husband, and that pushed her to pursue this relationship. Now, her husband Stephen was there during the trial, and when he heard this, he started to feel very guilty. He spoke out and said that if he had known Karen had felt so neglected, he would have stopped traveling for work because then she would have never done this. After that, he started to show up to the trial every single day to show support for Karen because he truly felt like this was his fault. Now, this rekindling didn't really last that long, and in the end, Stephen divorced Karen because it's not really his fault. Just because he traveled for work does not mean that his wife had to go get involved with the minor. As for how Ben felt about this, he spoke out during the trial and said that he didn't feel like he was a victim. In fact, he insisted that he was the one who pursued Karen, that he doesn't regret what happened, and that he doesn't believe he was harmed by this. However, a handful of psychologists have spoken out about this, and they state that just because Ben doesn't see himself as a victim doesn't mean he isn't. However, the judge actually agreed with Ben and was like, listen, if you don't feel like you're a victim, then I'm going to take that into consideration. And in the end, he sentenced Karen to a 22-month suspended jail term, which basically meant that she was let free. However, the prosecution did appeal this, and in the end, she was resentenced to only 6 months in prison, and she also had to register as a offender. When Karen was released from jail, she sat down with Ben to do a 60 minutes interview, and this interview shocked everyone. The two of them said that they were still friends, that they still had contact with each other. Ben continued to say that he didn't see himself as a victim. Karen went on to say that her life has completely changed. You know, she lost her job, her husband, her family, she went to prison, and she just feels like her punishment was too much. I think at this point in the interview, Ben was like 16 or 17 years old, and the interviewer was like, okay, why don't you leave Ben alone? Like, why are you still having contact with your victim? And Karen was like, well, he contacted me first and we're friends and it's nice to talk to someone that's been through this. The interviewer was like, how do you not understand how you need to leave Ben alone? Like, it's insane. Now, that interview was in 2005, so as of today, I don't know if they're still friends, but overall, it's just a really sad situation, and I just hope that Ben has healed from this. Male essay just needs to be taken more seriously, and a lot of people feel like Karen got really too light of a sentence, and that if the roles were reversed, you know, if she was a man that had done this to a little girl, that the guy would have been in jail for so many years, but because she was a woman and a mother, like, the judge showed her empathy and compassion, and that type of stereotyping needs to end.
Sukuna just tore out Yuji's throat. JJK chapter 263 spoilers. Yeah, so as y'all can see right here, JJK 263, Sukuna tears out Yuji's throat. I should have known the second Giga Akutami changed his picture of how he wants people to view him from this to the cat drooling in a very weird way. I should have known. Now the question really stands for this page that just got leaked. Is this the end for Itadori Yuji? And the question is, most likely not, but in the same breath, I also wouldn't really be surprised if it was. Giga Akutami's been taking out characters left and right, bro. He took out Gojo. Gojo was more of the main character than Yuji is. And no, I do not count this as Gojo coming back, because that's not Gojo coming back. That's his body with Yuta taking over it. Just please, please pray for my boy, Yuji. You can make this, bro. We believe in you. It's not looking good right now, yo. Like, that face, Yuji might actually, like, crash out, but it's not gonna help him.
This mother left her daughter to die alone while she went out on his 6-day bender. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Verfi Coody. 17-year-old Verfi and her 20-month-old daughter Asia lived together in a flat in Brighton. The block of flats that they lived in was run by the YMCA as supported housing for young families. Despite outwardly appearing as a good mother, Verfi didn't let her responsibilities as a mother overtake her social life, and so in the run-up to her 18th birthday, she and her friends all got together and began planning a really big celebration, Verfi having no consideration into her childcare. On the 5th of December, Verfi would leave her flat in Brighton and travel to London to be with her boyfriend to begin the celebrations, leaving Asia behind at home alone. Leaving Asia was something that Verfi would actually do pretty regularly. Prior to this, she had left Asia home alone at least 5 other times. One of these instances was when Verfi left Asia for 2 full days so that she could go to a friend's birthday party. Again, Asia is 20 months old. She was so used to being left alone that experts believe that Asia would no longer even cry out for help or cry out for a mom because no one ever came to comfort her. How heartbreaking is that for Asia to have learned that before she's even 2-year-old? On the 7th/8th of December, Verfi was in a nightclub in southeast London where she stayed out partying till 4 in the morning and got a birthday shout out from the DJ. On the 9th, she travelled up to Coventry, now 150 miles away from her daughter, who was still all alone in Brighton. And Verfi didn't care, she continued to party some more. On this day, Verfi actually texted her own mother asking her if she could borrow some money. She told her mum that she needed some more money for some food and to top up her gas meter, but that was a lie. This money was instead going to be spent on alcohol. Verfi's mother had no idea that she had left Asia at home by herself and was using this money to buy more alcohol. Almost 6 days later, Verfi finally returns home to the flat. She spends around about 3 hours inside of the flat doing God knows what up until 6:10 p.m. when she finally rings 999, telling the operator that her daughter wasn't breathing. When the paramedics arrived, Verfi told them that Asia had been poorly for the past couple of days and that she had recently given her some Calpol. Paramedics would describe Verfi as incoherent, distressed and distraught. When they got to Asia, they would find that she was cold to the touch, unresponsive and had signs of rigor mortis. She would be rushed to the hospital where she would sadly be pronounced dead. Asia's post-mortem would show that she died from starvation, influenza, with signs of dehydration and severe nappy rash. Her cause of death was determined to be from neglect. After the YMCA heard about the news of Asia's death, they decided to do their own investigating, and that is when they reviewed the CCTV footage which showed them that Verfi had left Asia all alone for 6 days. Upon seeing this, they contacted the police. Verfi tried to lie to the police and told them that she was with Asia the entire time. However, it didn't take long for them to refute that they had the CCTV evidence showing her leaving and not coming back for another 6 days. They were also able to use data from her phone showing that she was not in Brighton in those 6 days. At Lewes Crown Court, Verfi Coody admitted to manslaughter. On the 6th of August 2021, she was handed a sentence of 9 years imprisonment.
They say this is made in heaven, and it might just open a portal into another dimension. It actually might be a variation of something called an Euler's disk, named after mathematician Leonhard Euler, which looks like Euler. And if it never stops, you might be dreaming. It's a disk that's intentionally designed to continuously fall for a very, very long time, and this is how it does that. As the disk spins and rolls, or spoles, it starts doing something called precessing due to gravity, causing it to wobble, with a fall that can last upwards to 3 minutes or even longer. Precession is just a change in orientation of a spinning object's rotational axis. Quite a mouthful, but all it means is that the imaginary line that cuts through a rotating object is constantly changing where it's pointing. Kinda like the Earth does. It rotates to create day-night cycles, and its axis of orientation slowly changes where it's pointing over time, finishing a complete cycle every 26,000 years, also known as a great year. This glass disc was purposely engineered to lose energy as slowly as possible as it comes to a complete stop. As the disc loses kinetic energy, the angle between the disc and the surface beneath gets smaller and smaller while the precession of the rolls approaches infinity. Don't worry, I don't fully understand it either, but this approach to infinity creates a rapid whirring motion that almost feels like it's about to open a portal into another dimension. Mathematically, this disc should technically spool forever and just keep getting faster until the end of time, but it comes to a complete stop due to friction, vibration, and air resistance. You know, physics getting in the way. The length of the fall can be extended even more if it's spun on a mirrored surface using the signature Euler's disc design of a chrome-plated steel puck, held in a balance between gravity pushing it down and an upwards force exerted by the vibration of the mirror base. The low-friction mirror slows down the energy loss even more and is slightly indented in the middle, which helps it keep going too. And no one technically actually knows the exact details of how this particular Euler's disc design even works, apart from its inventor, Joseph Bendick, as it's a trade secret and this disc is trademarked and sold by only one company.
The most disturbing toys ever made. Baby's First Baby is a toy doll created by artist Darren Cullen in 2012. Intended as a social commentary, his goal is to raise awareness of teen pregnancies and what pregnancy really entails. As such, the doll has stretch marks, comes with spare diapers, milk bottles, and even its water breaks. And as if that wasn't horrifying enough, it even comes with a fetus, which is also pregnant. The Water Weenie was a toy from the 1980s that was basically a long, thick plastic balloon that would spurt liquid out of one end after releasing the pressure. Yeah, essentially, kids would loosen the clamp at one end, fill the balloon with water, tighten it again, and then turn the little knob at the bottom and squirt water at someone.
This woman says she was framed for her boyfriend's murder. John O'Keefe was born on December 8, 1975 in Braintree, Massachusetts. He grew up with his family and with his two siblings, Paul and Kristen. After receiving a master's degree in criminal justice, John went to go work for the Boston Police Department, living just outside the city in a suburb called Canton. John was described as a saint, as someone who was selfless, and as someone who everyone cared about. When his sister Kristen and her husband passed away, John actually became the sole guardian for their two children. As for his love life, John started a relationship with a woman named Karen Reed when he was in his 20s. However, their relationship didn't last long. In fact, an entire decade passed before John and Karen reconnected and began dating again. Their relationship seemed normal, but John's niece has spoken out and she says that their relationship, quote, was good at the beginning but bad at the end. Now, let's fast forward to January 28th, 2022. That day, John and Karen went to the Waterfall Bar and Grill and they ended up running into a bunch of John's acquaintances from the police force. This included a man named Brian Albert and his sister-in-law Jennifer McCabe. So they were all hanging out together at the bar, and then just after midnight, Brian invited a bunch of people over to his house to continue partying. Karen drove herself and John to Brian's home, but she only dropped John off. She didn't plan on staying and hanging out with them or anything like that. She just dropped John off at the doorstep and then she drove home. However, later that morning, Karen woke up in a panic at around 5 o'clock because she realized that John wasn't in bed lying next to her. After calling and texting John but receiving no response from him, Karen started to worry. She decided to call up Jennifer, who again was there the night before with her brother-in-law Brian, and they were all hanging out, and she was like, "Hey, I cannot find John. Can you help me look for him?" Jennifer was like, "Yes, I'll join you." So the two of them started driving around and they ended up going back to Brian's house. And there, outside of Brian's house, they found John lying in a snowbank unconscious. Karen tried to give him CPR while Jennifer called 911, but unfortunately there wasn't much that could be done. Now, it was clear to medical examiners that John's death was a murder. He had abrasions on his right arm, he had cuts on his face, he had 2 black eyes, and he also had some skull fractures. In the end, his cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma and hypothermia. Everyone was just absolutely heartbroken, and everyone was wondering, how did this happen and who did this? Well, this is when first responders came forward and stated that when they first arrived at the scene, they heard Karen say, quote, "I hit him." Okay, go to part 2.
Terrifying facts you will wish you didn't know. Okay. The last one will keep you up at night. At a certain depth, water will start to pull you down. In 2009, a caver named John Edwards Jones ventured into Utah's Nutty Putty Cave. He became trapped in a passage known as the Birth Canal. Despite 27 hours of rescue attempts, he remained there, stuck, upside down, ultimately dying from cardiac arrest due to physiological stress on his body. His body still remains there to this day, forever upside down. There are approximately 200 frozen bodies on Mount Everest. They are used as landmarks by mountain guides. If ducklings are bored, they can become cannibalistic and eat each other. When Disneyland's famous Pirates of the Caribbean ride opened in 1967, the skeletons were real human bones. The Imagineers couldn't create skeletons that met Walt's standard for realism, so they decided to go to UCLA and actually get the real thing.
This terrifying case will put you off ever babysitting again. It was 1977 in the beautiful area of Colorado Springs, USA. 14-year-old Maria Honzel was in desperate need of some extra pocket money, and what better way to earn some money than to babysit for a neighbor? She would often look after her neighbor Janie's children to earn some extra cash. She was more than happy to do so again. Janie's sons were 8 and 6, and they were really easy to look after for the evening. They lived in North Nevada Avenue, which was a nice quiet community where things out of the ordinary rarely took place. On the 7th of February that year, Janie went out for the evening, leaving Maria in charge. Now, Janie made sure to keep ringing the teenager just to check in and ensure that everything was okay at the house. She spoke to her just a couple of hours before getting in at around 11:15. Horrifically, when she arrived home, she was faced with something out of a horror film. The house was eerily silent. Janie immediately felt that something was wrong. She crept through the house wondering where her babysitter was. Then she got a hideous fright. In the master bedroom lay Maria's bloodied dead body. It was clear she'd been stabbed in a vicious attack. Police were alerted and Janie desperately went to see where her children were. Now, thankfully, they were unharmed and asleep. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, so police started wondering whether Maria actually knew her killer. The eldest of Janie's sons actually was able to provide a witness statement. He said that he did see a teenage boy wrestling with Maria into the bedroom. He seemed to be holding his hand over her face. He provided a detailed description of this teenager, but unfortunately nobody was identified. Forensic teams collected a blood stain from Maria's clothing. Unfortunately, at the time, the technology wasn't really there to do anything with it. That was until years later. In 2019, the police department decided to reopen the cold case. Then, after another few years, they finally got a match on the DNA on the clothing. The killer was identified as William Kernan Jr. Now, Maria knew him and he had actually been interviewed initially in the case. However, he was never deemed a suspect. He unfortunately ended up dying of natural causes before he could face justice for the grisly crime. However, knowing who killed Maria at least did provide her family with some sort of closure.
Fam, have you heard that a gigantic pyramid just popped up from nowhere under the Lake Michigan and scientists saw something terrifying inside?
No way. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Exactly.
Just last week, a bunch of researchers from Detroit decided to dive deep to explore what's under the lake. Little did they know they were about to hit the jackpot of weird. They gear up, and as they're sinking deeper, they start hearing these bizarre noises no one's heard before. Even though they've traveled around these parts loads of times, they shrugged it off and kept going. But then, bam! Out of the blue, they spot this massive structure chilling in the distance. The crew hops out for a closer look, running tests on the thing, and here's the kicker. The material it's made of doesn't match anything on our planet. It's like some alien architect swung by and left us a little souvenir. They're all freaking out because, hello, this is uncharted territory. Then they head inside and find something that just sends chills down their spines. But now, bag this. A huge sea eel stood right in front of them. If you want to see the footage, follow us, click here, then more, and then photos.
The 3 U.S. states that are impossible to invade in case of a war. Number 3, Texas. Texas boasts a strong military presence with 15 major military installations, including Fort Hood, the largest active-duty armored post in the U.S. The state's vast size, spanning 268,596 square miles, provides natural barriers and strategic depth. Texas also has a heavily armed civilian population with an estimated 1.4 million concealed carry permit holders. Its significant oil reserves ensure energy self-sufficiency during a conflict. Number 2, Alaska. Alaska's vast, rugged terrain and harsh climate make it nearly impenetrable. With over 663,000 square miles of wilderness, invaders would face extreme cold and limited infrastructure. The state's 6,640 miles of coastline and numerous islands create complex defense opportunities. Number 1, Hawaii. Hawaii's isolation in the Pacific Ocean makes it a challenging target for invasion. Located over 2,400 miles from the U.S. mainland, the state's strategic military bases, including Pearl Harbor, provide robust defense capabilities. Hawaii's mountainous terrain and volcanic activity create additional natural obstacles for invaders.
You want to hear a scary animal story?
Yes.
In 2006 in Sierra Leone, Africa, there was a chimp sanctuary, and it was 3 Americans, 2 Africans. Little did they know, the 31 chimps that were in this sanctuary had escaped because they're very abusive to these chimps. So these abused chimps escaped, 31 of them. And when they're going down, all of a sudden this ginormous chimp named Bruno, which was the alpha male, came into the middle of the road. He's 6 feet tall and weighs 270 pounds, which is double the amount of a normal chimpanzee.
That's Brock Lesnar.
Huge. They stopped, and then the chimp Bruno starts running towards this car, jumps and is banging on the car, rips the side mirror off, punches in the back window, grabs one of the African man's hands. Gates to the sanctuary were closed, and so the driver, who was African, tried to ram the gate to get through. Nothing happened except it disabled the car. There was one American in there whose name was Gary. He was knocked unconscious when they hit. The African driver got out, took off into the woods, and then the 2 other Americans got out too. Bruno gets Melvin, bites his foot off, and then Gary grabs a big stick and starts jabs him in the throat, and then Bruno stumbles back and then takes off into the woods.
King Solomon and the Ocean Gate submersible. Was it an occult ritual, and are they getting ready to do it again? Ocean Gate co-founder Guillermo Solane is planning a trip to Dean's Blue Hole, one of the world's deepest ocean sinkholes. It is 202.997 meters or 666 feet deep. Son Lane revealed his plan around the anniversary of the Titan submersible implosion, which killed 5 on board. It is an interesting name for the submersible that met a fitting demise because the Titans were imprisoned in a cavity beneath Tartarus. Also, why did the Titan look like Solomon's Shamir? A warmer substance with the power to cut through or disintegrate stone, iron, or diamond. Solomon was said to have used it in the building of the first temple. In one story, the demon king Asmodeus told Solomon that the Shamir was given by God to the angel of the sea, who then lost it and later committed suicide. This is how Solomon was able to obtain it. The Shamir was meant to have always been wrapped in wool and stored in a container made of lead. Any other vessel would burst and disintegrate under the Shamir's gaze. On board the Titan was Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman. Shahzada means prince or king's son. Suleiman translates to Solomon, and Dawood is the equivalent to the biblical David, the father of King Solomon.
The journey to Maxine's stardom has come to an end, and did this final entry meet my expectations? I'm gonna be honest, not really. It is the weakest in the trilogy, but we're also talking about X and Pearl, with the former being one of my favorites of the year it was released. As for Maxine, I did enjoy it, don't get me wrong. I was just expecting a little more because that's the way it was marketed, and I'm sure a lot of us were expecting this like explosive finale. But I can definitely understand and appreciate why Ti West decided to go with the giallo subgenre, because it did allow the film to focus in on Maxine's trauma as she has to confront her past in order for her to focus on her future. When the mystery person does attack, like, these scenes get so fucking brutal to the point like I was cringing from what's going on. It's truly some gnarly stuff. And I am sad to see this trilogy end, but I'm also excited to see what Ti West has in store for us with this next project.